Hey guys, welcome to Introduction to Adobe Illustrator Interface Part 2. So this is again the home screen as I showed you in the first video. Let's say that you're tired of seeing this when you launch the application. You can actually remove this screen by going into the Illustrator, Preferences, and selecting General, and uncheck this box that says Show the home screen when no documents are open. So click on that and hit OK. So now it disappears and you have just your application screen activated. Application screen, if you don't want to activate the application screen, you want to just see your desktop, you can go into the Windows and uncheck application frame. And then it just shows your desktop. But I'm going to keep it on so that you can see what I'm working with. Okay. We already covered how to manipulate and change your own presets on the panels. Here's my personal preference ones. I named it myself. I want to go over with the toolbox and some of the tool features, but for that I want to use a document that I created for this demo. I'm going to go ahead and open a document by going to the File menu up on top and hit Open Document. Navigate to where it is. Here's my demo files, and this is the one that I want to open, and hit Open. And my demo files opens up here. It shows up on tabs. If you don't want your documents to open up in tabs and you just want them to be free floating, you can actually change that under the Illustrator preferences as well and go to User Interface and uncheck Open Documents as tabs. If you uncheck that, then the documents opens up as their own unique individual pages. But I like to have it in tabs so that I can keep myself organized. So I'm just going to cancel that. Okay. So the selection tool here selects all the vector objects in a group setting. For example, this is the Pemberton's Whiskey Alliance logo. This is actually a student work. I'm going to use it for demo. When I create my selection, this is a grouped object. I have these bounding boxes, also known as skeletons. I can create my selection, rotate the image if I like, any way I see fit. If I hold down the Shift key and click on one of these bounding boxes as the corners, I can enlarge in proportion, scale it. Or if I don't hold the the Shift key, I can distort my image. And let's go ahead and go to Edit, Undo my scale, or Command Z. This is the keyboard shortcuts, are located next to each one of these items. Edit, Undo scale. And just goes back to the way it was before. Or you can Command Z, edit everything that I just did, and go back to where you started. The Direct Selection tool and the Group Selection tool, the Group Selection tool kind of works like the Selection tool, but you can select individual objects that are already in a group, and then you can go back to your Selections tool after you made your selection and scale those individually without having to ungroup your objects. So let's edit, undo that. Now the Indirect Selection tool is a tool that you use to edit any of the anchor points. So if I create a selection here, notice that this object has multiple anchor points. I can click on the anchor point, I can change the shape, I can manipulate the actual path itself. This is a cusp. But let's go ahead and edit, undo that. To demonstrate this even further, if I create a rectangle, use one of my rectangle tools. These are the basic drawing tools. And if I draw a rectangle is made up of 4 corner points. This is an anchor point. This is a corner point that contains no anchor handles. And I can just use the Direct Selection tool and manipulate the anchors of these shapes. Manipulate the angles. Now the Bezier curve from the left and to the right will always be on a straight line. The angle of the actual curve does not matter. So let's go ahead and delete that. So what exactly are vector shapes? Vector shapes are made up of anchor points and Bezier curves. They are components in mathematical algorithms. So even when you zoom in on these objects, grab my zoom tool, they remain crystal clean shapes. Whereas I'm going to hit Command 0 to fit in window. This photograph here, as you can see here in my links box that I have, it's a JPEG file that I place by going to File, Place, and you can navigate to find a photograph like this building JPEG file, and then just hit place. Make sure that the links checkbox is checked. And I placed the photograph in here, but the reason why I have it is so that I can show you the difference between the two different kinds of art files. Vector object, as I said, made up of mathematical components called anchor points, can be blown up to the size of a skyscraper. You'll always have beautiful, crisp, clean shapes. You don't have to deal with resolution, whereas a photograph, it is resolution dependent. They're made up of certain pixels per inch. So if I zoom in one of these corners, as you can see, here are the pixels. This is probably a 72 pixels or 72 dpi dots per inch image. So they cannot be blown up too big, because then you'll end up with the pixels the size of your monitor. So yeah, I mean, the art files are different, different kinds of format, and you can use these intertwined, but and it's not resolution dependent. That's why a lot of artists tends to go with vector art files, because you have so much more flexibility to work with than you do with a resolution dependent image. If you have a photograph that does not have enough of the resolution and it needs to be blown up a certain size, then you run into these kinds of issues that you have to troubleshoot and find workarounds and things like that. Illustrator is my personal favorite program because I don't have to deal with resolutions and pixels. As long as I can just about anything that I can do in Photoshop, I can do just about in Illustrator, a couple of effects and whatnot. So I'm going to take that photograph, I'm going to delete it. I'm going to hang on to this for demonstration purposes as well. The magic wand tool kind of works like the way Photoshop does. If you have something that has the same color, I can click on that and it selects everything in that color or that group. And same thing here, white fills, which is this inside portion, it's all the fills. The lasso tool here, and to unselect something, you just grab a selection tool and click anywhere on the page and it deselects your object. The lasso tool selects several anchor points. If you highlight all this area right here, it'll only select those anchor points, and then you can go back and manipulate those as you see fit. The pen tool is by far the most powerful drawings tool in Adobe Illustrator. Once you master this tool, there's literally nothing that you cannot draw using this program. And pen tools are made up of a couple of different sets. You can add anchor points, you can delete anchor points, and you have your anchor point convert tool. I didn't quite mention this before, but if you see these little triangles underneath these toolbars, each one of these tools, that means that there are additional tool sets or tool families associated with those tools. Like in the type tool, you have all of these over here that are associated with type and all the different things you can do with typography. And this bar on the side here, if you click on that bar, then you have your tool sets in floating palettes. So you can manipulate your tools that way, have them as floating sets. That way you don't have to keep going inside and toggling back and forth, and you can just select your tools on the fly depending on the kind of art files that you're working with or what you're trying to do. So you have that kind of flexibility, which is really neat. The line tool here, you select the line tool, I'm going to give it a stroke of black so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to give it a fill of none. And I literally just draws line segments on the fly. That's what the line tool does. And delete. The type tool, I can spend an entire day just talking about all the different things you can do with typography. There will be a separate video tutorial about just manipulating type in Illustrator. And so the simple, basic drawing tools, you have the elliptical tool, and draw a circle. If you hold down the shift key and draw, it draws a perfect circle. Same thing with any of these other tools. If you have a star tool, you draw star-ish shape. You have the shift key, you can draw your stars. If you have the rectangle tool, you can draw a perfect square. Holding down the shift key, you hold down the option key, it draws it from the center. You hold down option and shift, it draws it from the center. Same thing with the elliptical tool. Option shift key draws it from the center, or just the shift key just draws it from the corner, as you wish. So let's undo, remove those guys, remove these guys, get rid of that. The eraser tool here, well, then you also have your paintbrush tool. You literally freehand on the fly. Same thing with your blot brush tool, draw on the fly, simple freehand tools, get rid of that. Then you have your other shape builder tools, and under that you have the pencil tool. The pencil tool is pretty neat because you can actually just draw things freehand without having to click and contain any anchor points, and you come back and close your path. Then you can give it any color you want using your swatches palette. Click on that. Okay. Rotate tool and reflect tool. The rotate tool, you can click on an object and tell it to rotate 90 degrees and hit OK to apply. So you got to have the object selected and rotates on the fly. Or you can set it to rotate specific angle, have a preview, say 90 degrees, hit OK. There you go. Command Z, edit, undo, all that fun stuff I just did. The reflect tool that's inside here will literally mirror your image. So if you double click on the reflect tool, I want it at 90 degrees, show a preview, hit OK, and it will mirror my image. Edit, undo. The scale tool here, make sure you double click on that. Well, you got to have your object selected, of course. Double click on the scale tool. Guys, make sure that your scale, strokes, and effects are always checked. If you don't, and you have strokes or any kind of other effects on your object, it will not scale them in proportion. Let's say I want this scaled at 50%. Hit OK to apply, and scales at 50%. Edit, undo. It looks like I colored this with a black stroke, so let's eliminate that. And same thing with these guys here. Color these with a black stroke. I'm not going to worry about it right now. Okay, so that is the reflect tool and the scale tool. Then you have other kinds of reshape tools and shear tools as well. You can tear those off and explore with these tools on your leisure. This here is the width tool. If you have a stroke, for say, you can select your width tool and you can manipulate the width of an object. If you hold down the Option key, you can bring them on the inside, only from the left side of the right, that way. If you click on the actual path and drag out, it changes the shape of the stroke. So that is the width tool. This one here is a free transform tool. You have an object selected. You got to have an object selected to use most of these tools. This one here, you can distort your image by simply clicking on one of these bounding boxes corners, hold down the Command key, and will distort your vector object. As you can see, edit, undo perspective. Puts them in different forms of perspectives. This tool over here is called the Shape Builder tool. We'll get into that later on in the semester. It basically just combines shapes from your path. Let's edit, undo that. Merges them together. This is the perspective grid tool, guys. Don't click on that one just yet. It's a pain in the butt to get out of it. We'll have a tutorial covering that tool later on the semester, as well as your gradient mesh tool. The actual gradient tool, on the other hand, you can manipulate gradients. So if I have a fill, go into my gradients palette here, select the color gradient. This is by default. Just click inside this icon. It gives you a gradient. Let's set the stroke to none for the sample. If I click and drag around, I can change the gradients palette here like that. Change the colors. If I want to add colors, I can click inside this little area and add more little canisters, as many as I like. I double click on that and I can access my swatch palette and I can assign additional colors to it. The yellow. And instead of black, let's just make it a little blue color, something nice. I can have a radial blend, or I can have a linear blend. This was actually a really new feature. This is called a freedom gradient. Not quite sure how to use that just yet, but it's holding up. Let's go back to the linear blend, please. Now I can actually, this is, as you can see here, this is a shortcut to this area right here on the gradients palette. So these little triangles controls the distance between the colors in those specific regions. So if I want to add more white into the magenta, so I can manipulate it in that fashion. If I want more yellow to go into the color, manipulate it in that fashion, or I can do it here on the actual gradient tool. If I want to make this gradient a little bit larger, I can go from here and bring it out and expand it more so than I need. And these also give me little shortcuts. If I double click on that, then I have access again to the swatches palette. So again, like I said, these are just shortcuts to activate the swatches palette. So that's the gradient tool in a nutshell. All right, the symbol spray can tool, I would need to use symbols. If I see a palette that I need and I don't have it on my presets, all the palettes are located under the Windows menu. So I can go to Windows and find symbols, and here is my symbols palette. So let's say that I want to do a symbols of this little ink splash. So if I click and drag, I can create multiple instances of the one original. That's what a symbol is. It's an instance of multiple instances of one original. Cool thing about the symbols is I can send this to the printer, and the printer will only read one object and can print however many I have on this page. So that's a neat little feature. I'll get rid of that. The graph tool here in Illustrator, or the column graph tools, we will definitely not be using that this semester. It's probably one of the most useless tools in Adobe Illustrator. I've been in graphic design industry for over 25 years, guys, and I tell you, I have never once had to deal with any of these tools. So we will not be covering any of this this semester. The Artboard tool here, you can change the size of your artboard. You can add more artboards. If I want this artboard to be smaller to fit my document, I can do so that way. Which creates a custom page. If I want this to be a letter-sized document, I can change it either landscape or portrait. Command 0 fits in Windows, so you can see. I can name my artboards here, or I can name my artboards here under the Artboards palette, and also I have my artboards options. Then I can add additional features to that. So hit OK. By the way, I'm set to points. I do not want to be in points. I want to work in inches. If that happens to you guys, you can actually set your units under the Illustrator Preferences settings under Units, and then change from general to inches, stroke type points, and so on and so forth. It should work that way. So the Whiskey Alliance logo, I can enlarge it. All vector object shapes. The hand tool. So the hand tool allows me and helps me navigate around my canvas, my documents. If I have the selection tool selected, I can hit the space bar, and the space bar is the shortcut to the hand tool. Space bar. So if I'm drawing, or if I grab my zoom tool here, I can zoom in. And if I create certain selections out of my group settings, and I want to check something out, so I just hit the space bar, and I get my hand tool, guys. So if I want to fit back to window, I can double click onto my zoom tool, and it brings me to actual size document. Or I can go to view, hit fit in window, and brings me back to fit in window size. Or I can hit Command O, and that also does a fit in window. Command 1 is actual size. So these are some awesome keyboard shortcuts to keep in mind. Command 0, fit in window again. Now with the zoom tool here, by default, it's a zoom in. So if I click and drag down, I zoom in. But if I click and drag out, I zoom out. Keyboard shortcut is Command plus and minus. Plus and minus. Double click brings me back to actual size, or Command 0, fit in window. Okay. Now, again, as I mentioned before, this is the fill, and these are the strokes. Not to be confused with foreground color, background color like you do in Photoshop. This item here will toggle or swap the colors. So now the stroke is blue and the fills is black. So let's grab my pen tool here, and I'm going to freeform draw some object and come back and close all the way. So here I have a fill stroke of blue, a fill color of blue and a stroke of black. If I want to change these colors, there are a couple of ways of doing it. I can just simply grab my swatches palette. Let's bring that out. If I want to change the stroke, I want to make sure that the strokes is set to the front. So then I can change that to a different color. Here's my strokes palette. And I can change the width of that stroke, let's say 6 points, so you can see what's going on. I can also change the alignment of my stroke to align on the inside of my path or to the line on the outside of my path. But by default, it's set to align in the center, so it distributes the color evenly left and right. Let's grab my zoom tool and zoom in on some of these corners here. You can also grab my selection, select my object. You can also select how you want the corners to finish. If I want the caps of my points to don't come up with a sharp edge, I can round off those caps and I can round off my corners. As you can see now, my corners are now nicely round. Or I can end my corners to end right where the anchor point is. So you have those awesome features. I can set it to be a dotted line, but don't want my corners to be rounded off. Make it look like a coupon clip out, if you will. Change that to a thinner point stroke so it kind of makes a little sense. Now you can change the amount, the point size of the dash. If you want to have a gap, you can set it to 6 points and just, play around with some of these settings. You can change that. You can also have it to finish in different formats. If you want it to finish in this fashion, by default, it kind of tries to change the corners to finish to make it look a little more natural base, if you will, and that's the default setting. If you click on Show Options, you have other features. You can add an arrowhead, or you can add different kinds of formats. You can have the strokes to have all these different kinds of features as well. Again, play around with some of these settings and see what you can do with that. So let's delete that. I want to clean up my palette, so I'm going to reset. Okay, fit in window. Talk a little bit more about a few other things. All right, so that's pretty much how you can change your colors. Another way of changing a color, so I'm going to grab my Indirect Selection Group tool because I don't want to ungroup this. And I'm going to grab one of these little leaves here. So this leaf has a fill color of is a Pantone color of 166. But if I want to change that color, as I said, one way to do it is through accessing the Swatch Palette. Another way is, and this goes for the strokes as well, you can double click inside the fill box and your color picker shows up, which is a shortcut. Let me cancel this. So it's a shortcut to the color palette, which is this area right over here. So if I double click on that, I get my color picker. If I click on color swatches, I get a shortcut to my swatches palette. So here are the swatches that I have listed in my swatches. So if I want to change it to a green color for shades, and they're named by the CMYK color values, I can hit OK to apply that. So now everything in here is changed to the green. Or I can double click on that. And if I'm working with web-based graphic and I want web-safe colors, I make sure that this box is checked. And you get the web-based hexadecimal. But again, we will not be doing any kind of web-based color graphics in this class, so make sure that's unchecked. If I want to add more magenta or more yellow to this, and this is where I would do it, I would add 100% magenta and tab over, and then I can see a before and after. So this is before the color with my change. This is the color that I'm going to come up with, and I'm not too happy with that, so I'm going to say 45% magenta, and I kind of want it a little darker, so that looks good to me. Or I can manually drag it inside the color selector until I see something that I am satisfied with. So this is the color that it is now. This is the new color, so you can compare and hit OK to apply. Okay, let's edit, undo that, and edit, undo that again. And there's the original artwork. Okay, so there are two different kinds of view mode in Adobe Illustrator. You have the view mode and the outline view mode. The outline view mode allows you to look at all the vector paths and shapes without any fills and strokes. Preview mode takes you back to the regular view mode where it allows you to see all the vector elements with the fills and strokes. Okay, so that's the two different view modes.